Good morning. We'll call the meeting to order. Council is conducting this meeting in person and via conference call in accordance with the Municipal Government Act, Section 199. Council chambers is open for public attendance in person. However, councillors and members of the public may still join meetings remotely using our current teleconference process. If you've submitted a comment, please request the chair. Submitted a comment request, the chair will call on you at the appropriate time. The chair may also ask for comments and concerns from the public relating to a particular topic, and at this time, phone lines will be unmuted. If you would like to speak, please state your name. We ask that only one member of the public speak at a time. All persons will be allotted 10 minutes to speak, as per our procedural bylaw. We ask that if the meeting recesses, that any callers hang up and call back in as the meeting reconvenes. This helps with call quality. Please note this meeting is being recorded and may be uploaded to our website and/or social media. To eliminate background noise, please mute your phone during the meeting. We also ask all attendees to mute their devices to reduce disruptions to the meeting. Everyone has a right to be present at council meetings and council committee meetings. Any attendees that are considered disruptive to the progression of this meeting may be removed at the discretion of the chair as per the MGA Section 198. We thank you for your cooperation and understanding. We have an agenda before us. Does anybody have any changes or additions?
Good morning, Reeve Brian from administration. I do have some proposed additions to the agenda. There were two items that administration omitted to include into the package, and there were two letters from ratepayers. One was related to bylaw 2022-10 land redesignation bylaw response letter, and that was circulated to council yesterday at 3:32, and that letter was from Sheila O'Sullivan. So we're hoping to add that to agenda item 2.1.1. And then there was another response letter that was omitted, and that was also circulated to council yesterday at 3:32, and that was related to development permit number 2022-156. It was a response letter from Amanda Morse, and that would correspond with agenda item 2.4.13. Two just minor amendments that we need to make for the agenda as well is there are two performance review for the CAO. And we had initially put in section 24 for FOIP. It actually just needs to be amended to section 16. So that's the two appointments from the two vendors. And then the last one is just another addition to the agenda, and that's under FOIP section 24, advice from officials, and that is regarding litigation against Wheatland County.
Any other additions or changes? Councillor Kestron and Deputy Reeve Clausen.
You mentioned the letters omitted. Were they omitted or were they after the deadline?
Just omitted. So that was just an administrative, just an attachment forgot to get dragged in into the package. So they're good.
I just thought a little clarification.
Deputy Reeve Clausen.
I'd like to also add ratification of attendance and mileage for CGC July 28th, 2022.
I think it's in the agenda.
Yes, that would
Okay.
be.
Yep,
Okay,
page
sorry.
172.
I'll withdraw that.
You bet. Any other additions or changes? If not, a motion to approve the agenda is amended.
Also move.
Councillor Bigger has moved. Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We had the minutes circulated from the regular council meeting July 5th. Any errors or omissions? If not, a motion to approve.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Councillor Laprise has moved. Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We also had the minutes from the public hearing, July 5th. Any errors? Councillor Eichert has moved. Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. Start with 2.11, bylaw 2022-10.
Good morning, Council. Stefan from Administration presenting. So bylaw 2022-10 is first reading item. The application proposes to redesignate the lands from Agriculture General to Natural Resource Extraction District in order to facilitate the operation of a aggregate extraction operation. Pardon me. So the lands are located 3.5 miles southeast of the hamlet of Carsland, 1.3 miles east of Highway 24, and on the south side of Township Road 220. So you can see from the air photo, there was some previous aggregate extraction operation taking place on the site in the past. This was prior to 2000. At the time, that could take place under a DP in the Agriculture General District. However, now under the current land use bylaw, they require the NRE district. So that previous DP is lapsed. So that requires the new land use at this point. So we'll go through some of the details of the proposal here by following through the land use bylaw. So we obviously assess this with the municipal development plan and the Vulcan intermunicipal development plan, but the bulk of the requirements are here in the land use bylaw. So I'll start with that. We have a number of special requirements. So the first one looks at, and I'm just following through on page 17 if you want to follow through. So the site plan was provided by the applicant, and that is on page 30 of the overall package. So that shows their phasing plan as well as the location of some of their topsoil storage areas, as well as the orange line here, which is the area of the proposed actual operation. So all these details will be provided obviously further on during the development permit stage, but this is kind of the general indication for now. The main item to note of this, out of this one here, is the 30.48 meter offset. This says from the bank of the Bow River. That should actually be from the top of the slope, so that's 100 feet. You can see again from the air photo, it looks like that was obviously done previously. There is a 30.48 meter, 100 feet setback from the top of slope. However, that can be varied pending the submission of a geotechnical report. So the applicant intends to do that. That will be reviewed at development permit stage. And essentially whatever the geotechnical report says, if it's 20 or 10 meters, then that's something MPC could consider as an appropriate setback variation for that distance. This section also looks at the transportation section. There were no real concerns with the volumes or any potential upgrades in the traffic impact assessment. However, of note, the haul route didn't reflect the proposed, or I guess forthcoming, realignment of Highway 24 and Highway 817. So that'll need to be updated for the DP stage. But just for your information, so this is obviously Speargrass here. The lands are located kind of off screen over in this direction. So currently, Township Road 224 comes and then it veers in two directions, and there's an intersection here and then up here. So those will be closed. The highway will be redirected in this red direction and then carried on in this direction. So what will actually happen, there won't go to these intersections. It'll carry on a new range road in this yellow line up to the Green Circle Hill, which will be a new intersection. So that's anticipated according to Alberta Environment in either 2022 or 2023. I imagine probably 2023 at this point. But essentially that will need to be updated. And also moves kind of that direct area of where they're accessing the highway a little bit further away from Speargrass, which is good. The other item in this of note is the Birmingham Screening. Now many of these will need to be obviously re-looked at when we look at the development permit. That's when they get into a little bit more detail. As you can see though, again I mentioned before, they've got these topsoil areas where they're storing some of their overburden and topsoil. So that will help a little bit for the screening. There are also some vegetation on these areas. And it is also located reasonably far from any dwelling. I think the closest dwelling is approximately here, which is just over, or I think it's that one, just over a mile away from the edge of the subdeck lands. So environmental items, obviously I mentioned that a little bit before. That's the land use bylaw allows us to require some additional requirements when we are in location in close proximity to a water feature. So obviously in this case, the Bow River here. So they have provided losing my place here, pardon me. Baseline soil and terrain assessment and a wildlife assessment. So it indicated there may be some further requirements from that. Again, that's based on where they're proposing specific things in the development permit. You interpreted that at that time. Again, much of this land was impacted already previously, so that'll need to be assessed. The main item from this particular section was the environmental site assessment. So that looks at areas of potential contamination. Because this had an operation previously, you can actually see right here is the location of a kind of shed. So they had some storage of vehicles in this area. So there is potential for contamination there. So that requires a phase 2 site assessment, which will actually determine whether or not there is contamination and then how it can be mitigated. The land use bylaw also requires us to consider adjacent residential development. So there's a setback, it's approximately 200 meters or 650 square feet. So you can see the blue area here, that's that distance. So if any dwelling were to be in this area, essentially that's not appropriate. But in this case, there is no dwelling. Again, I think it's approximately a mile to the nearest dwelling. Community consultation is another requirement. For applications like this, before they even submit to us, they're required to do engagement with the community. So they did do this. This is provided in attachment B. So essentially they sent out a letter, received some letters, and just had a bit of a dialogue with people who responded initially and then provided that to us. So that's everything for the land use bylaw. So the municipal development plan is a little bit more broad. Essentially just ensures, the primary objectives is to ensure that natural resources are managed safely and effectively, and that extraction activities are respectful of surrounding land uses. So that's obviously why we're requiring a number of these things, having things like the community consultation, and then obviously at the public hearing as well, to give area residents the chance to voice their thoughts, but also making sure that the applicant is providing all the documentation that we have enough information, and they have enough information, and you obviously have enough information to make an informed decision. MDP also provides more backup for the environmental areas, so again the Bow River, and again that's why we could require those other items. Lastly, the IDP really just reflects these other items. We did circulate some of the, some of the residents within Vulcan County, down here south of the river. I think we got a couple of comments from them, but yeah, essentially that was a requirement in the IDP, and then also just making sure that we're considering the effects of visual intrusion, dust, noise, traffic, etc. Basically all the things that we consider under the land use bylaw anyways. So we did do that. So in terms of everything at this point, it's been provided. There's no concerns with this proceeding to public hearing. So that's what we're recommending at this point, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions before first reading? Council's wishes.
I'll move that council move first reading of bylaw 2022-10, this being a bylaw for the purpose of amending land use bylaw number 2016-01 to redesignate block 1, plan 871-1027 within east half 34, 21, 25 west of the 4th meridian from Agricultural General District to Natural Resource Extraction Processing District as shown on the attached Schedule A forming part of this bylaw.
Any questions or discussion on the motion? All in favor? Motion is carried.
I have a request for resolution number 2. I will not be able to attend September 20th. And I think because I'm the council of the area, I'd like to be at that hearing. So I'd like to move that the public hearing for bylaw 2022-10 be scheduled for October 4th, 2022 at 9 a.m. in Wheatland County Chambers.
Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried. We'll move to 2.12.
morning, Reeve and Council. Joel from Corporate Services here, and I'll be presenting the next agenda item. I'll just go down here for us. So this is 2022 utility rate and master schedule fee update. And the proposed changes that we're presenting here are adjustments to the water and wastewater utility rates. And they're consistent with the financial information and discussions that have been presented in the prior couple of months, including the utility subsidy review report that was presented to regular council on May 17th. And the utility rate strategy report presented to the committee of the whole on June 14th. Details regarding the specific rate adjustments are provided in the body of the report. And they're included in the current rate table as well as proposed rates, and as well as on page 110 of your agenda package, which I'll go down if you want to follow along. Here you can see the prior rates are striked out in red, and the new proposed rates and dates are in green. So the proposed changes, they reflect the three criteria of they're consistent and similar rates across the county. They address some inflationary cost pressures, and it also sets some groundwork for reduced subsidization by non-utility revenue sources. All water and wastewater fees are set out in the Master Schedule of Fees bylaw. As such, administration is recommending council to proceed with 3 readings to approve the fee adjustments to take effect November 1st. That concludes my presentation.
Any questions regarding the adjustments?
I do have a question. So for Muirfield, we've made a huge adjustment, I see. And I see that their rates previously were pretty much out of line, I would say. When you take the average Canadian water use and wastewater use, they would be paying like $200 a month, where others ratepayers are paying $46 or $47. But we're still trucking that. Are we going to be incurring a huge cost to reduce their rates as much as we are? We know, yes, we are. So our intent was to reduce subsidies. Is there a halfway point we could go to until we get a solution for them, or is this what we want to do?
So just Brian, through the chair to the rest of council, we do understand that we will be having a reduction in overall revenue from water and wastewater in 2023 based on these changes, but we do intend to bring back to council another proposed rate increase as well. And hopefully at that point we will have a permanent solution for Muirfield that doesn't involve trucking, and that is to correlate with the entire West Side servicing strategy that we're currently working on. I know council hasn't received an update recently on that, but we are working on it, and that is currently with our engineers as well. As for the specific rates, council did have the goal or objective in mind to get everyone kind of on the same page in regard to utility rates. So this is kind of the best solution that administration could come forward with, knowing full well that there will be a reduction in revenue. We could find the exact number. I believe it was around 150,000 was a reduction from Muirfield, and then the remainder was going to bump it up a little bit. And then in 2024, we thought that we'd kind of be back to 2022 levels. So that's kind of where we ended up with that one.
Gotcha. So it's a temporary couple of years, maybe we'd be subsidizing until we get a better solution.
Yeah, and we're hoping with a permanent solution with potential grant funding, and that's, I think, maybe the holdup from administrations that we're turning over every single, I guess, stone that we can to ensure that, see if we can get grant funding. Lots of grant funding available for water. Water is more of the government's priority when it comes to grant funding. I say wastewater is probably a secondary tier. But we do believe that we have a strong case for some grant funding for the Lakes of Muirfield based on the size and growth of that subdivision.
Okay, as a temporary measure, I'd accept that.
Councillor Eckert and then Councillor Kester.
Are we going to, is this going to be brought forward on the committee of the whole? I've got an awful lot of concerns, but I'm not sure this is the proper place to address it, because we seem to have lost our way of what our strategy was going to be. Well, I'm not sure if now is the time to appoint, or if we have a discussion in a committee of the whole, I'm good with that, but it's going to be, it's all about utilities, so.
That would be at the discretion of council entirely. Perhaps council, if council doesn't want to do the bylaw readings of this, they don't have to. Council could pass a motion to bring this back to committee of the whole. I guess it just depends on what council wants to do. And based on the previous discussions, it was administration's understanding that council wanted to get everyone on to the same uniform rate in the county and proceed that way. If council has another strategy in mind that they want to implement over time or immediately, it's up to the discretion of council to kind of add that one to a future agenda, either a council or committee of the whole for council's consideration.
And we can definitely debate it today. Like, this is a recommendation from administration. Obviously, it's at council's discretion what we want to do with it. Councillor Kester.
Just a couple comments. This Muirfield thing, we're developing a reserve from the sale of lots that come with it. And I'm always felt that if council wanted, we could take some of them reserve money until we get a permanent solution and use that money to tide them over, make it fair. That part I'm okay with. It's the rest of it looks pretty good except for Clooney. And I know they have special, but the rates, the flat rate for wastewater and capital levy, and that's all they have is theirs. I'm aware of the situation. I'm just wondering, why couldn't they be the same as the rest of, because they have a similar system. They have identical system as Gleason has, to be honest with you. So I'm just wondering why the difference.
Joel from administration. So, Senator Reeve to Councillor Kester. So with that one, we just took the approach of viewing them as a wastewater instead of a water rate, whereas the other rates on that table, as you can see, are water. So we increase the current wastewater rate on those by the same 8% as all of the rate increases. And that was just simply the basic approach on those.
So I see their wastewater rate $17 across the board, except for Clooney's $26.
So we don't meter, because they don't have water, we wouldn't meter their usage. I'm guessing that would be a factor.
And I also did the math using the average consumption, and then wastewater is 90% of water use is how they usually use it. And so Clooney ends up with a typical monthly bill of $47.10, and other municipalities would be $46.27. So they're very close.
Very close.
I wondered that too. I did look at it. I thought, well, why is Clooney a little higher? But because they're not metered, they don't pay that consumption rate. So it does end up being comparable, I thought so.
So moving that forward, when our ratepayers look at this document, the note shouldn't be clarification, or if somebody from Clooney has questions, I guess staff can answer it. I just want to
that there's no consumption included. Yeah, it's compared. Yeah.
Because we're going to not extreme steps. We're going to steps to make everybody the same.
Yeah.
And if it looks different, should be some sort of.
But without that consumption, then it wouldn't. Yeah.
That's a good idea. Question to administration: is there a way to just put a note, like on the
I like that.
fee schedule under the utility section or something, just noting that wastewater isn't metered in Clooney, and so there's a higher rate to account for that? I think Councillor Custer makes a good point. It's good to have that visualized for anybody who's looking.
We can add it into the notes section of the bylaw. I think administration could make a comment under that notes section very similar to that. It would just be very, very, a very short note, and we could definitely include that.
And perhaps when we communicated as well, because you had referenced communicating like prior to the changes, maybe we could just highlight that in the communication materials.
Yes.
The council thinks.
So administration's plan in this RFD, it does show under follow-up action and communication is that we're just going to provide informational pamphlets out to current utility account holders. We can also publish that on our website as well and make that very, very clear exactly why that flat rate is different.
Excellent. Deputy Reeve Clausen.
Thank you for the report here and the recommendations. So I support this. However, I do know, like, as I sit on WRC, we look at we know our true costs, right? And we have to charge that out. I'd like to see us similar to that and have, at some point, I think we all know our rates are way too low. And we need to have, I'd like to see a goal that we know in 20 years time we got to increase it 30-40%. I don't know what it is, or a way or a strategy to lower those costs as well. I think that's important because not everybody in the county can have access to this. And when we look at Muirfield as particular, there's also another thing, their taxes in that area, they pay quite a bit for each residence there. And it generates quite a bit of tax in that area, and we're growing there as well. So with that, I will move first reading. And that council move first reading of bylaw 2022-20, a bylaw to establish fees for providing various municipal goods and services.
Deputy Reeve Clausen has moved first reading. Questions or discussion?
So there's just a minor, I think, maybe typo on the rate schedule, master schedule of fees. So that on line 3, there's a water service agreement for Rockyford, and in the notes it says as per agreement with Hazard. So I just think we need to, probably is an agreement with Rockyford. That's all.
We can definitely update that one, and maybe if Councillor Clausen could just move as amended.
As amended.
Or, yeah.
Good catch. Thank you. Any other questions or discussion? Councillor Eckert, you had raised some concerns. Is there a way that we can address the concern today?
Anything we pass in council can be changed at the next council meeting, and I understand that. I think I'm sort of confused on where we at one point in time had consensus that we were looking at cost recovery, and none of this stuff appears to be heading in that direction. So that's why I think we need a discussion in committee of the whole, whether or not we're going to continue doing this, because by my calculations, approximately somewhere between 15 and 20% of county residents are actually allowed or have the ability to take services from our utilities. So that means approximately 80% of other ratepayers are subsidizing this. And I find that I can't work that through my head that is somehow anywhere being close to being fair. So I think that's why we need a discussion of the committee of the whole, whether or not, if we decide that we are going to subsidize this whole thing and we're never going to go to cost recovery, I believe the ratepayers have the right to know that, and that should be a discussion we have. So I'm good with this as long as we can schedule a discussion on the committee of the whole about where are we going with utilities in this county, because we are about to embark on a massive utility endeavor on the west side, and if we subsidize at this rate, we are going to go broke. We have to figure out a way. So if we're going to go cost recovery over there, which I'm 100% good with, we have to go cost recovery everywhere, or there has to be a plan to get to cost recovery. So that is why, so if we can schedule a discussion in committee of the whole, I'm good with this, because it's just a temporary solution.
Yeah, and I thought that our plan was to kind of gradually get there, but we didn't want to hit people with a huge incremental increase right away. But certainly I agree with discussion is good, important.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree moving towards cost recovery, also doing it incrementally. We do have a motion on the floor for 8%, but we can vary that. That was a recommendation from administration, but if there's a rationale for doing something different, my preference would be, if we're going to vary it, to do it today rather than at a future, I'd rather not set a rate now and then change it again, in a month or two or whatever. It could be a communication challenge for administration. I believe we had done 15% each year for 3 years, 18, 19, 20, I believe. And then, or it might have been 19, 20, 21. I'd have to double check my notes. But I know we did do 15% 3 years consistently. I don't know if we want to look at something like that. My only other comment would be a request to the Wheatland Regional Corporation representatives just to concurrently look for every efficiency possible to obviously bring that water rate, make that as efficient as possible. I don't know if we want to consider a motion for administration to assist with that, or if you guys just want to work with the board with that. But we could contemplate that after we deal with the rate bylaw. Personally, I would be okay with 15% again. I know it's a lot when you do that every year, year over year, but we do still have a significant gap. And from a strategy perspective, I certainly do want to get towards cost recovery. That's my own personal preference. So it's just, how do we get there? I know administration had brought forward the 8%. I think that was based on a number of different factors, somewhat being that we had done, I guess, in total 45% over the 3 years previously. But I know we still have that gap. Part of what creates that gap is the water rate. And then obviously we're looking for efficiencies within our own operations as well to try and bring that divide between what we're collecting and there's a fire ban has been issued, is what's alarming on everybody.
Are we going to die?
Everybody's
Nope.
gonna go.
That's a new one.
I do have everything silenced. It must push right through your silencing. So anyways, that's my 2 cents. I think I saw Deputy Reeve Clausen.
Yeah, I have no problem with scheduling an increase into this, whatever we decide. Being, when I look back when we started and how far the rates were back then, and we did that 15, and it made a minuscule difference. We're still way off base on a lot of places. Now, I don't know if we can pick a number today, being that we don't know if some communities are closer or further away from cost recovery. We've kind of looked at that before. Do we want to have everybody be the same? I mean, I know Councillor Bigger has some issues probably with that as well. So it's just, I know there's going to be an increase. There's going to have to be at some point. So just the cost of inflation right now would be sufficient. But definitely want to, I would definitely want to have this. We've talked about it for years and years, and I'd like to have a formula going forward and the answers so we know exactly where it's done. It still needs a little more work.
So maybe, because I think this issue goes back farther than when I came to council. So for me personally, it would probably be good to get just a little bit of background at how we came to where we're at today. I completely agree with Councillor Eichert. We can't have 80% of the county subsidizing 20% of the county. So I get where we're at, but if I could just get an understanding of where we're at, where we're going, and when we'll get to cost recovery, I think that would be quite helpful.
We do have in the committee of the whole package from our June 14th meeting, administration had provided under the utility rate strategy sort of the gaps, and they are consistent across all service areas. Carsland current, that's wastewater. Oh, no, it's total. On page, if you happen to have that package, it's on page 31. Carsland is currently collecting on average $121. Estimated full costings $327. Speargrass $109. Full costing $316. Gleason $112. Full costing $312. Rosebud $121. Full costing $327. Clooney, obviously being the exception with just wastewater, collecting $43. Estimated full costing $128. Muirfield $207. Full costing $312. So I think at this point we have room across all service areas to contemplate increases without like collecting more than it's costing, if that makes sense. It's just what percent we want to do. And within that document, there is modeling for the 8% as well. Councillor Kester, thanks.
Perfectly appropriate. We bring this to committee of the whole. If I can make a couple recommendations, if we're stuck at 8%, it's going to take, we're not even halfway there. It's going to take us a dozen years or more to gain it. So different percentage rates would be helpful. If we're going to cost recovery, I'm thinking it would be appropriate for every community to pay what cost recovery is. If the county is financially capable of getting us the right numbers for every community. I know on the east side it's easier than the west side and all that kind of stuff. But we have to have a good way to track it. So come the committee of the whole, if we could have a report on which costing each community, and then council can decide how many percentage points they want to take and set a target year for such and such. And I think that would be a totally appropriate way to do it. We're going to go cost recovery and go cost recovery. We can't go cost recovery and blanket over everybody because that's what we're fighting against now. We'll go cost recovery on Rosebud and go cost recovery on Carsland and leave it go at that if we can do
so
that.
Just
if we're capable.
Question what further information council's looking for. So far what's been discussed was just presented at committee of the whole in June, broken down by service area. It's done right down to reserves, revenues, subsidy rates. And I guess I'll just raise too, there are sort of different philosophies. We have discussed this before. I don't recall when, if it was with our full current council or if it was before, but obviously there are municipalities that do like a consistent rate across and are striving for cost recovery from a sort of a system, like a utility perspective overall. You can look at it by community. There's different sort of philosophies or strategies that we can look at for sure. Yeah, and I agree with the comments about like 8%, especially with obviously the inflation that we're seeing right now is not going to get us this year any closer to cost recovery. Administration had provided some rationale for potentially proposing that during the committee of the whole. I don't know if it was in the notes or if it was just communicated. I'm just wondering, because we did have the presentation at Committee of the Whole, if there's further information we need, or if it's just coming down to the rate, if we want to debate that today. If we need more time, we can definitely take more time, or if we need more information. Councillor Clausen.
Just wondering for
Deputy
the,
Clausen.
for the bylaw, do we need to establish percentage increase now, or can it be added later?
So the schedule of fees bylaw would need to have that rate in there. So that rate in there now is an 8% increase. So I'm just taking a look at our procedural bylaw just to make sure, just to see, I guess it depends on what council wants to do. So I want to try to just provide council some options. I'm thinking one option could be just approve that first reading and then schedule a future time or date on whatever council wants to do with the utility rate strategy. And I'm just, the other option I'm just potentially looking up is seeing if you could withdraw your motion if that's something you'd like to do, but I'll just take a look. Shouldn't take too long.
I was going along the lines of probably the first reading, and then for the second reading, we'd have that information, and we'd be able to establish a percentage increase based on some information provided by staff. I think would probably be the best way to go.
Yeah, and I think that would be an option for sure. So just first reading, that means the bylaw technically received first reading, it's not active. And then further information for council, just a request by resolution. And then once council receives that information, reads it, comprehends it, then council can make an informed decision on what the majority of council would like to do with utility rates.
Can I just get clarification on which information we still require?
For myself, I'm not sure, it should be possible that we could figure out what the cost of water production is in each of the areas. We know what it is at WRC. And the price of water should theoretically, in my mind, be cheaper in Carson and Speargrass than it is in Muirfield, because there are no conveyance rates from WID for that. So if I could find out where we're at on each one of our water plants and how much it costs to produce water at each one of those water plants, then that would, because it doesn't, like there again, it's all that, we can't charge everybody what it costs to produce water at WRC standard plant across the county. You can't do that. But so each plant, I believe, there's going to be differences. So where we have to go to in order to get cost recovery on each of these communities that have servicing it. That's the information I would require.
So you're thinking like a timeline to show if we increased it 15% every year, it would take 10 years or...
Well, my mind is WRC...
on each individual area.
Yeah, WRC, it's $5.13 a cube to produce water in order to stay. And then those numbers, it should be cheaper, I believe, in Carson Speargrass. In my mind, I could be wrong, than it is in Muirfield. Those numbers then we can work on. So each one of these communities will have a different rate, but I don't think that is fair, right? Like, then you can go to each one of the communities and say, at this point, we've caught up. The water's not going to get any more money. At least we have to know that information. If at that point we choose to say we're going to subsidize them, that's our decision. But I have to have that. I have to have that information. So that's the information I'd be looking at.
So just a question to administration. Was that captured in what was presented at the Committee of the Whole? Because I see like direct utility revenue. I see expenses broken down by service area. I may have misunderstood. I thought that those expenses were already broken down by service area.
So I did, at the June Committee of the Whole, administration does believe we did present that information. I did just re-email that June report back to council. So it would be on page 4 of that PDF. Potentially one thing that administration did omit was the timeline on when it would get to cost recovery. And that would be based on, I guess administration didn't provide models on when. So we did provide the full costing, but one thing we didn't provide was, let's just say 8% increase over 20 years minus adjusted for inflation would get you to this point at X date, or that same rate, 8%, change that to 15%, when exactly you would get there. So I think that's one thing that administration did omit, is the break-even point. However, we did provide the full costing. And council should have that, and that would just be on page 4 of that PDF that we sent over.
Break-even could also be challenging long-term, just given some of the uncertainty with like the rates of inflation that we're seeing right now. And as well, if we are hoping to find some efficiencies with WRC, that would obviously like decrease the expenses there, which could potentially get us like closer to cost recovery sooner. So there would be like some uncertainty just in terms of our expenses. Obviously, this year we could see some pretty significant increases because of inflation. And I think it would be somewhat challenging to predict like the next couple of years. I mean, you can average inflation over like a longer term. The overall is like around 50%-ish. So is there more information? Do we want admin to try and model out a time frame, or do we want to choose like a percentage for this year, get an increase, and then look at this, say like for the following 2 or 3 years? What's council's wishes? And I have no issue bringing it back to the committee of the whole, but we just had it at committee of the whole. Obviously, we can't make decisions there, but we can debate here. I mean, we can look at a different rate. Now would be a good time to do that if we're going to, I think. I don't know if administration concurs. Councillor Laverson?
And this is just one, but just based on your page 4, and I just picked Carsland because it was the first one, not to pick on Carsland, but doing the difference between estimated full costing and current costing with an 8% increase, according to my quick calculations, which might be wrong, it would take 24 and a half years to get the cost recovery. So I think that's the thing that we're kind of looking at here, is that's a pretty long-term plan for cost recovery. I think we need a different number.
Does council want to look at, I'll just float, like, I know we have a motion on the floor, but 15%, and then administration could model that out where we would be at the end of 4 years, like when they present it for next time. But we could set it today, and at least it's a step in the right direction. I realize it is a significant increase, but we did hold our tax rate. And I think we have philosophically, there's been consensus through these conversations that we're moving towards cost recovery. I don't know what people's thoughts are. Deputy Reeve Clausen.
There's a lot of information we've digested over the time, and thinking about it some more here, I'd be okay with going 15 on the first, and actually 15, 15, and 15 again, if that would get this moving forward. Because I think if you look at the information we looked at, that will get us closer faster. Is that too much for people to bear? I don't know, because I personally don't think so, because the rates are low. When I look at what we buy water from WRC and what we're selling it for, we're losing money every time we do that. And we're buying it from a private entity and selling it on one end. At some ends we produce our own water, I understand. But I think even at that, with the 15 over 3 years, we're not going to break anybody. We're not going to be actually making a profit yet anyway. So
I think I did some calculations too, and it looked like we could maybe in our area be very, very close to cost recovery at 15. But the bills are high. I have to say the bills are high.
Just doing a quick calculation, that would take it from 24 and a half years to 11 years. That's not including inflation. And costs, other increases, but and we can only assume everything's the same because we don't know how much water will go up. We don't know how much inflation will go up. But that's taking it down to a little more realistic number.
Yeah, especially if you add in potential like efficiencies that might bring the expenses down. Like you could get much faster, potentially. Deputy Reeve Clausen.
I'm just trying to move this forward a little bit too. So if we went with first reading and added it instead of 8%, it's at 15%, and then we can review, that gives us a chance to review year 2, year 3. We could come back and look at this in a year's time and decide if we want to do maybe 7% next year. Maybe it'll give us a chance to see where we're at, because if we're getting closer to cost recovery faster, which is a good thing. Just trying to hopefully selfishly move this forward. So I would be okay with first reading with the adjustment of instead of the 8%, and I realize it's not in the motion, but it'd be the 15% if we could adjust that.
Councillor Leverson.
And just so that everybody's clear, the 15%, that was just a quick division of that, didn't take into account. I mean, it would be a lot less than that because you had 15, then you had 15 on. If you had 15 on to the next one, it's like this was just a simple math thing. It didn't take into account any of the true calculations. It's just to kind of give us a reference point.
For me, the 15% was historically when we first got on council. We did that for 3 years in a row because the rates were dramatically lower, and we looked at it then and we realized it was the same situation we're in. We're just trying to. So, to me, that was just the number that was utilized before.
Yeah, and we could find out in 3 years of 15, we could go down to 8, or maybe we'll be caught up. Who knows? Just depending on what efficiencies we can find and stuff. But I think it brings us closer to what our target was. I know we kind of said potential 0, whatever it was in the wording, but I think we need to get to cost recovery because it's not fair to have, like as Tom said, 80% of the people subsidizing 20%, especially when they can't have access to the same service.
So, process question to administration. If Deputy Reeve Clausen were to propose an amendment to his motion to 15%, that could arguably be a substantive change. We could vote on the amendment and then vote on the motion.
Yes. What I think council should do is vote on that amendment prior to, vote on the amendment, ask Councillor Clausen if he would accept the amendment, and then vote on that amendment. And then I think maybe something that might be advantageous today, just because this bylaw reading is occurring very early in the day, it might give an opportunity to our manager of finance and manager of technical services to go back and actually amend this chart and then bring it back to council so you guys can review the text in the bylaw, and then just do the bylaw readings later today. Or another option would be is that Councillor Clausen could withdraw his motion.
Withdraw would probably be cleaner.
And if there's no objection from anyone, then the motion can be withdrawn, and then we can just bring that bylaw back with the amendments. So either way, just 2 options.
I definitely like the idea of seeing how it plays out on the bylaw and have all the numbers change. So whatever's easier, I can withdraw, or I'd accept the amendment either way. So
just procedurally, if Deputy Reeve Clausen withdraws that motion, if there's no objection from council, that can proceed. If there is an objection from council, then it cannot proceed. Alternatively, if there is an objection, you just do first reading with an amendment, and then we'll bring back the amendment in the chart. So if there's no objections, that might be the easiest way. It doesn't seem like there will be any, but I'll leave that to council if there's any.
I'd prefer just to have the amendment voted on, and then it keeps it live, just in case it goes. We've talked about this before, and I realize the more information you get, the more you think about it, the more things can change. So I'd prefer to keep the motion for the bylaw and accept an amendment. And that way it comes back, and then coming back today for second reading with the updated charts.
Okay, so we could do We can vote on the amendment, and then we could do a motion to postpone to a certain time. We could do like 1 o'clock, or I guess we have a 1 o'clock appointment. Following the 1 o'clock appointment, 1:30 or 2 o'clock or something, and just move it on the agenda. So you're going to amend your motion to a 15% increase
For 1 year.
for the first year.
First year, yeah.
Yeah, and we could have administration bring back some more modeling in terms of like timeline, that type of thing, prior to considering this bylaw again for the following year. At least then we do get this in place for now. Any questions on the motion to amend? All in favor? Motion is carried. And then perhaps a motion to postpone until this afternoon?
We still have to have amended motion voted on.
Oh, yes. Good thinking. Any questions or discussion on the amended motion for first reading with 15%? And administration will bring that back so that we can see the full impact. Any questions? All in favor? Motion is carried. Perhaps now a motion to postpone.
Make a motion that staff brings it back, not postpone, brings it back. After
Postpone.
Okay. Any questions or discussion? All in favor? Motion is carried.
Just through the chair, we do have a 10 o'clock appointment, so this might be an opportune time for council to take a 5-minute break if they want one.
That would be perfect. We will reconvene at 10 o'clock. Thanks, everybody.
You have been muted. To unmute yourself, press.
We'll call the meeting back to order. We will move
Mute
to
off.
closed session under FOIP Section 16 for CAO performance. It's under CAO performance review. Any questions or discussion?
You have been muted. To
All in
unmute
favor?
yourself, press the star key twice.
Motion is carried.